lot of times there's a problem we know we should be solving. While we go to actually solve it, an emotion pops up. And all of a sudden, instead of just doing the thing that would solve the actual problem, there's an emotion we don't want to feel. And all of a sudden, our brain says, let's prioritize solving that. The simplest way of being able to get it across is to ask them a simple question. Are you problem focused or are you emotion focused? And usually they just have a blank stare when I tell them that at first.
Do you have a way of helping someone gain awareness of when they're problem focused or?
Yes. So on today's episode, we're going to talk about one little question that makes a giant difference for people as far as their performance. It was something that you're already familiar with. A lot of the guys in the elite, we talk about it. And it was actually something I don't think you know, but that the head of psychology of the Mossad taught me. And it's a simple question. And we're going to follow that up with a simple tactic at the very end. But are you problem focused or emotion focused? So before we get started, first off, welcome. Thank you for coming on board. Do you have any questions about this? Because you're already familiar with the subject.
I'm familiar with the concept, but yeah, I'm very interested to go deep and to understand it.
Cool. All right, so let's kind of break it down. The reason this is so important, so a lot of times you see a lot of the guys come into the arena, and week number one, they get really clear on what they want from a logical perspective. Like, okay, rationally, this is what I want to accomplish. Then in week number two, they break that down. Say, okay, these are the things I need to do. I know that in this specific situation, this is the problem. This is how I need to address it. But before they're able to do that, they sometimes struggle. So on the simple things that are, let's say, emotionally challenging, like, oh, I know I should be putting my phone away before 9 p.m., that they do. But on the more emotionally challenging things, like I need to have the hard conversation with my employees, or as soon as I know that something's bothering me, I need to bring it up with the team. Mm-hmm. They don't do it. And we try to break it down for them. And the simplest way of being able to get it across is to ask them a simple question. Are you problem focused or are you emotion focused? And usually they just have a blank stare when I tell them that at first. So that's why I want to break it down, because once people actually get it, it's been immensely helpful. So before we get started, any thoughts on it?
Do you have a way of helping someone gain awareness of when they're problem focused, or like, so what's the sort of cheat code of
Cool.
identifying?
Yeah. So before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about what it is.
Sure.
So the reality is that a lot of times there's a problem we know we should be solving. Like for the business, we need to grow the marketing team. We need to let go of someone who's not performing, whatever it be. There's an actual problem at hand. Mm-hmm. Now, while we go to actually solve it, an emotion pops up. And all of a sudden, instead of just doing the thing that would solve the actual problem, there's an emotion we don't want to feel. And all of a sudden, our brain says, let's prioritize solving that. So instead of me having the uncomfortable conversation and solving the actual problem, how do I solve me feeling uncomfortable? And all of a sudden, we gravitate toward that emotion. And we're emotion focused all of a sudden. And instead of having the conversation with the employee, I'm just like, you know what? I don't feel comfortable because I feel like people might judge me, because who am I to say these things? So I can solve that by simply not having this conversation, or by being so nice and around the bat about it, or whatever it may be, that everybody feels good, even though nothing got accomplished. And it's a very interesting thing that I think naturally we gravitate towards being emotion focused instead of the actual problem. Because again, we're emotional creatures, and if we're not aware of it, it's usually what happens first, because something gets triggered there. First of all, does that make sense, that explanation?
It does. So if I try to summarize it, and you can sort of correct where I'm wrong. If I'm thinking strategically, or if I'm problem focused, I can almost communicate it via math, or the very simple explanation. Dot my I's, cross my T's. If I'm sitting in sort of emotional thoughts, or just trapped in the emotion of a thing, that's where I'm dealing with stress, anxiety, betrayal, whatever the emotional states are, and I'm trying to. Maybe I'm not conscious of it, but I'm trying to actually solve an emotional feeling, not actually just do the practical steps in order to solve the issue or to move forwards. Would that be
Exactly. So let's put it this way. If you would have done that, what would have likely happened afterwards? You would have said to yourself, like, why did I do that? That didn't make any sense. That didn't actually help me. Mm-hmm. Like, that's because it didn't actually help you with the problem. Mm-hmm. It helped you by solving an emotion you didn't want to feel in the moment. Mm-hmm. And that's the big deal. Like, another example I can give, one of the guys who's recently gone through the arena. So he was having a hard time having the tough conversation with his business partner. And he knew what the problem was in the business they had to address. But at a certain point after the conversation, like he would say, it would drag on, it would take a long time, it would get a bit heated. He said, like, every time I just, like, at the point I was like, you know what, it's not that important. And I just kind of throw my hands up and be like, whatever, okay. And they wouldn't solve the actual problem. The reality was, though, that at a certain point in the conversation, also because it would drag on so long and he would get tired, he just felt this emotional discomfort. So he's like, okay, instinctually, even though he's a stud, he would just end up optimizing for how do I not feel this emotional discomfort anymore? Okay, what's the solution to that? Stop having the conversation. Just say, okay, it's not that big of a deal. But the problem was still there. And it's something I see so often that we know what we would tell somebody else to do in this situation, but in the heat of the moment, we don't do that because we get an emotion. So instead of solving the actual problem at hand, we actually say, how can I not feel this emotion anymore? And we're emotion focused instead of actual problem focused.
Perfect.
Is that clear?
It is.
Cool. So first off, any question around that?
No, I think I'm pretty clear on that.
Okay. So what I think the most important thing is first off to understand that's the thing, that we all do that. Every one of us, like myself included, you included, we all do it. And to ask ourselves in a lot of situations, am I being problem focused right now or am I emotion focused? And emotion focused, for some people, it's running away from, example, a tough conversation or people pleasing or even just like people eating junk food or binging or whatever it may be. It's like these are things to soothe your emotions. Now, the main thing to catch it, to make sure that you can say like, how do I catch this? How am I aware of it? Is if basically you're doing something in a more complicated way or in a longer way than you should be.
How would someone have have a preconception of what a optimal time period was? So if we're doing things in a longer way than necessary, how would we have our equivalent of a Google Maps to say, look, the path to where you want to go is X, you're taking 3X, because I think a lot of people might struggle with not knowing how long a resolution would take.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's actually the answer is embedded in your question. So if you were to externalize it and say, in order to get this thing accomplished, what should somebody else do? What would be the simplest and most direct path to do it? That might be emotionally difficult and uncomfortable. If you're not doing that, then by default, you'll probably be not doing that because of emotions. Like, okay, this is the thing I should be doing. This is the actual problem. But along the way to solving the problem and doing the things, doing the steps, emotions pop up. So instead of going from A to B, you deviate because, this emotion popped up. So all of a sudden, I need to detour. I need to solve that emotion first. Okay, then I can come back to B. And then the way to B to C, I feel another thing again. And I'm focused on that all of a sudden, instead of just going direct to C. So if you can see that this would not be the path you'd recommend somebody else to take, like you say, this actually take X, Y, Z, it should take this amount of time to just do these simple things, but it's taking you a lot longer, it's probably because you're taking detours to solve your emotions instead of just a problem at hand. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Maybe I could share one or two
Please.
Examples and you can tell me how close to the mark I am. So let's say in health, someone wants to lose weight. Then maybe a question you could ask is nutritionally, are your decisions being made based on sort of taste or convenience or price, or are your decisions made based on what are the right amount of macronutrients or calories in order to get the outcome you wanted?
100%.
Or in business, could it be a situation where an entrepreneur is focused on something they believe might be moving the needle for the business, but actually isn't. So it could be, I want to grow the social media following for my business to X. So is your outcome to have a huge following, or is your outcome to actually generate a profit? Or I want to build an amazing team.
Great. So let's stop that because that's a really big one. So what you're saying here is basically, what's the actual problem? Is the problem you're solving actually I want to grow the business's bottom line as far as revenue, profits? Or is the problem that I want to feel emotionally validated because I have a big following?
Yes.
And those are two different things. And I think that's the biggest thing. Like, is the problem actually a real world problem that is a problem to be solved in the real world, or is it an internal one, just how you feel? And again, I'm not saying that you should never be emotion focused. Like some parts of life, we do want to feel good, positive, whatever it may be. But just to be aware of what you're doing. Because a lot of times people will think they're solving a problem in their business, like you just said, but they're not. They're just filling an emotional void that they want to have filled. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with doing that, but it's that awareness of what are you actually doing. That way you can actually be in control and decide what do you want to accomplish. Does it make sense like that?
It does, yeah. So where I've noticed that sort of play out in businesses is where people are focused on emotional problems, thinking that the emotional problem is the actual business constraint.
Yeah.
So it's actually their need for status. It's their need to be seen as something. It's a need for connection. It's any number of underlying emotional needs. But it's not as simple as I need to decrease my cost of customer acquisition to X, or I need to increase my throughput of this stage to this stage by Y. That to me sounds like a relatively objective analysis of a business. That's very rarely the case. Often it's more so, I need to build a great team, I need to build a great culture, I need to build a bigger audience. Yeah. And so it's probably there's underlying emotional needs, not actually what the business needs.
Yeah, and I think, like we said earlier, a great way to separate that and clarify that is, so let's be honest, we don't care as much about other people's emotional needs as we do about ours,
of course.
Of our own, right? So if I can tell someone, like, listen, if you want to grow your business, this is what you need to do, but I'm doing something different, then I'm probably, like, the filter there is my emotional needs. They all of a sudden get in the way. Mm-hmm. Like, instead of saying, listen, man, you don't need to grow your following. You don't, like, I don't care, so to speak. If I'm a business coach, I don't care about your social validation right now. We're trying to get you to bottom line. Then they'd be like, okay. But if someone's doing something else and they're actually, like, optimizing for that, for that feeling of safety, that feeling of acceptance, social status, whatever you want to call it. And I think it's really important for us to understand, when am I being problem focused versus when am I being emotion focused? Because if we can't understand that, and if we can't stop ourselves when we're about to do something that's emotion focused when we shouldn't be, then we're just wasting a ton of time and a ton of energy on things that don't actually get us a result. And again, the result that we actually say that we want. If you want to say that right now I want to focus on my emotions, that's what I'm doing, great. But if that's not what you're saying, because you're saying actually you want to solve a problem, want to scale the business, whatever it may be, but you're focused on your emotions, that's a problem. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And I've experienced that myself at times, and I've seen it in other people, where we're hoping that professionally in our business, we can solve what's probably more personal problems. So we're trying to, whether it's that social validation, something else, we're trying to use the business as a tool, probably subconsciously, to actually solve personal problems. And that's why growth is constrained, or things are more complex or more difficult than they need to be, because we're actually playing the wrong game.
Do you think they purposely try to use the business as a tool, or is it just kind of like, well, that's what they happen to be doing 7-8 hours a day, and their emotional needs just happen to be coming out, so to speak?
Good question. I don't know. But the sound bites that often terrify me when people are looking at starting a business is, well, it doesn't matter if it doesn't make that much money because I'm just passionate about it. I'm like, well, it's guaranteed to not make much money if that's how you're starting it. And that passion will wane real quick once things get difficult. So, or, I just want to build a great team. So build a great team to do something, or just build a great team for the sake of having a team. Yeah. So if we've got a good understanding of what is strategic thinking, or focusing on the problem, what is focusing on the emotions, is there a process that you've found to actually catch them? Because my concern is that people who are trapped in the problem, the emotion, don't realize they're trapped in the emotion.
Yeah. So this is a common theme for so many of these things, to be able to catch an emotion. I think it's very hard to be aware of, like, let's say if a belief is holding you back, or if there's certain emotions taking over, if you haven't first done the work to clarify what you should be doing, what someone else in your situation should be doing. Because then you can use that as a measuring stick. Like, am I doing the thing, or am I not doing this thing? If you haven't done that, it's extremely, extremely difficult, because you can always, like, we all have our biases, we can always bullshit ourselves. Now, if I've done the work and say, you know what, like we said, like week number 1, they break down what they want, week number 2, exactly how to do it, then they have this measuring stick, the guys in the arena. They're like, oh, wait, why am I not doing that? What's going on? Now we can figure it out. And I think that's the key thing. If you don't have that, it's very, very difficult to do. Like, unless you're hyper aware all the time of your main emotional biases and needs and all that kind of jazz, it's hard to catch. I think it's too big of an ask. But just, like, honestly taking an hour and figuring out, okay, for this project, what should I be focused on? What actions should I be taking? What actions should I not be taking? Like you said, what are the bottlenecks? What are the things that don't actually matter? Then you can say, okay, am I doing this? Wait, okay, that means I'm emotion focused. Because if I'm doing this thing, like trying to grow my social media following because I want more validation, because it'll make me feel good about myself, because it's cool, whatever it may be, then, okay, if I'm doing these things, I'm emotion focused. And it's basically having a stockpile of knowing, this is effective, This is problem focused. This is ineffective. In this context, again, it's emotion focused. Oh, I'm doing these things. Okay, I'm emotion focused. Time to stop.
Got it. If I was to communicate that visually on a piece of paper, and I was sort of point A and point B, and the arrow represents getting from point A to point B, make more money, get more market capture, whatever the outcome is of B, would a series of prompts serve as a toolkit that we could use? So if I said, what should I be doing? I'm at point A, I want to get to point B. What should I be doing? Well, I could probably only start to hypothesize that once I've even cleared that point B is a destination. So if I don't even know where I'm going to go, the chances I'm going to magically land there are pretty small. So defining the actual objective is probably step one. Now I've got the what.
Yes.
And then now I can start the process of the eternal why. So, well, now that I know the what, I should do this. Why? For this. Why? For this. And eventually, I think this is a tool that I try to use for myself to think through first principles and to think of it like an engineering problem, to find out where are the constraints, where can I add more or where can I delete things to avoid the emotional traps, because they can be so clouding, they can cloud judgment so much that I think when we're in that emotional state, the biggest challenge is we don't even realize we're in that emotional state, and we're more likely to react emotionally to other people trying to prompt us. So, if you're trying to grow your social media following, what you really should be doing is optimizing client retention. The last thing, if all your energy is focused on building a social media following, which is the wrong problem to be solving, probably the last thing you want to hear is someone saying, hey, stop caring about your social media following and focus on client retention. It's almost like the painful truth, maybe even at a subconscious level.
Yeah.
So trying to have a toolkit to assist people, because I think the biggest challenge is that they're so ignorant of the fact that they're in an emotional state, and it can be very, very challenging to recognize that and to get out of it and to think strategically. That's where I like to try to think visually and to roadmap things, because the more I need to draw the problem, the more I need to sort of actually get down to the truth of or inch myself closer to the truth of the
You
problem.
have to externalize it in some way.
Yeah.
So can I add something to that?
Please.
Are you open to the idea that you're playing this on hard mode?
Yeah.
So I'll put it this way: like, even what you're saying right now. First off, I think what you mentioned is absolutely right, and this wouldn't have worked if you wouldn't have said, like, first off, you have to understand what the target is, because if you don't have an end goal, then you can't reverse engineer and figure out what's actually a problem, what you're actually solving the problem, what is the actual problem to be solved versus what are your emotions. That, I think, is, like, first off, I'm very glad that you added that because it's crucial. Now, what you said, okay, I have this target, so what should I do here and why? That is already adding a layer of difficulty, because you're saying, what should I do? But instead of it just saying, okay, if somebody had this target, what should they do? Because again, like, I might have certain emotional needs, but this fictional person that I've never met before, I don't really care about their emotional needs as much. I'm like, strategically, this is just what someone should do. That's why it's so much easier to give other people advice than to take our own, or to give ourselves even advice. So a simple method is to always externalize it as much as we can. Like, why we did the whole person X thing so many times. Like, what would somebody else with these kind of targets, these kind of levers at their disposal, assets, whatever it may be, what should they be doing? And all of a sudden we can figure out, oh, this is so simple. This is probably what they should be doing. Because it takes out all our emotional stuff out of the way. And like you said, even if we try to be aware of our emotional stuff, like, it still has a very, very strong pull.
Right.
So instead of trying to, like, fight against that pull, if we can just completely sidestep it by saying, not about me, what should I do, but what should somebody else do? What advice would I give them? It resolves that need to like try to work through it, so to speak.
Do you think that there's is there something just based in how our amygdala sort of works that leads us to maybe pivot when we should be pushing through a problem, or to take the wrong actions, and it's coming from some sort of primordial evolutionary sort of fear mechanism? Because I just see this playing out in business a lot, and you could even take a very established brand or a product like Coca-Cola. If the big wigs at Coca-Cola said, we want to increase revenue next year or profits by $1 billion, there's a million things they could do. They could launch new products, or they could just go, okay, based on our distribution, brand loyalty, whatever else, we could increase the cost of a can of Coca-Cola by like 0.1 cent, and based on like 50 years of history, that's going to be the fastest path because we're very clear. Increase bottom line by $1 billion. If they're trying to do that, plus grow an amazing company culture, plus trying to tick all the boxes with diversity and inclusion, plus trying to do other things, now it gets very convoluted. And now they're probably in an emotional state where they're trying to avoid the pain of failure or public ridicule because they weren't hiring enough people from different sort of genders or whatever. So the more they can just get really clear on that target. The target is make extra money by what deadline, by how much, and now they can have a more objective analysis of what lever is most likely to yield that result. And that's a process I think very few entrepreneurs can go through because we're juggling so many balls in the air at one point in time. We're highly likely to go into that default emotional state.
I think that's true. I think it's also, let me put it this way. That person in Coca-Cola, there's some CEO there. He's a person, he's a human being. He has his emotional wants. However, he also has a board that doesn't give a shit about his emotional wants and needs. They're like, this is the bottom line you need to fulfill. And I think there's most entrepreneurs, like before they get to a certain level, a certain size in business, you don't have that. And a lot of times you steer the ship for good or bad. And if you don't have people that are basically saying, I do not care about your emotional needs right now as a human being, this is what is required for the business, you'll naturally do things that are for your incentives, for your emotional incentives. And like what you were saying about how we're wired, it's like we're wired to survive, not to thrive. It's cliche, but it's true. It's like our brains are not wired to see reality for what it is. They're wired to help us see reality for the way we can survive the most. So they over-exaggerate a lot of the fears, a lot of our feelings. And whenever there's a sense of somebody might not like me, that immediately gets to, okay, I'm going to get excluded from the tribe. Then I'm going to be left alone and dead. And this isn't just like 100,000 years ago, even 500 years ago. If like your neighbors didn't like you and you were left out, you're probably going to die by yourself.
Sure.
And a lot of this stuff ends up coming because, again, we're creatures that are wired for survival. And we struggle to contextualize the fact that in this day and age, that shouldn't weigh as heavily on our decision making than it does, and it feels. So a lot of times we're about to do something that we know logically would get somebody else the outcome that we say we desire. However, along the way, there's a certain fear that pops up. Like, what will people say? What will this mean? Oh, I have this hole. I have this lack. So you know what? Actually, this is more important. And that little part in us that's emotion focused, that's focused on survival, pops up and takes over. Because it's more primal, it's stronger, it's the default way we react if we're not aware of it. Like the whole reason we're emotion focused instead of problem focused, even though it doesn't make sense, because we're creatures that don't always make sense. And that's the thing, we're emotional creatures. But if we're not aware of that, then it's when it just goes on a rampage. That's when it takes over.
Yep.
And this tool, the main purpose of it is just to give people a sense of control. It's like, oh, okay, I can be aware of what's going on right now. Who is in the driver's seat? Is it the more logical me that's focused on the problem, or the emotional me? Which one of them do I actually want to listen to right now? And give you that position of power. That's it. Does that make sense in that way?
It does. Would you see benefit in having, say, 3 stages? I'm almost thinking about like the stages of competency, right, from unconscious incompetence all the way through. Would there be a toolkit that the listeners can sort of learn from? Say, in box A, write down what needs to happen. So obviously you need to define the objective first. Then box A, what needs to happen? Okay, if I can't work out the what needs to happen, start there.
Do not proceed, do not pass, go, do not collect your advice.
And then, second box would be, do we have the capabilities, either individually or as a team, whether that's funding, technology, whatever, to actually execute on what needs to happen? And if it's like no, it's like, well, revisit box 1. So do you know what needs to happen? Are you capable of doing what needs to happen? And are you willing? Because you might know what to do, might be capable of doing it, but the emotional constraint comes in at the are you willing to do it? Because it's more important that everyone likes me than I actually cut these low-performing staff, or it's more important that I'm seen to do these right things even though I want to be doing something else.
Define willing. What do you mean by that?
Like literally pulling the trigger. So like committing to the actions So you know what needs to happen, you're capable of doing them, and then you actually make the commitment to actually execute upon those actions.
So let's talk about this. I think this is really big. We're jumping a little bit ahead, but I'm glad we got to this way. So I think, and this was something I'm going to talk about later, but like as far as that checklist, one of the biggest kind of like hacks to overcome this stuff so it doesn't just blindside you is to actually preemptively understand what you're going to bump into. So like I always like to give that ice bath analogy. Like if you are just walking down the street, all of a sudden your skin turns red, you get very cold, you get goosebumps, you're going to be like, what's going on? You're going to freak out. You're going to stop. You're going to stop whatever you're doing, and you're just going to focus on that because you're like, something here must be wrong. This doesn't fit the expectation that I have when I usually walk down the street. Everything is chill. Something must be wrong. I need to stop and figure that out, right? But if we're going into an ice bath and I tell you like, listen, man, there's a lot of benefits here for you, another side of it. All right. However, you're going to feel cold, your skin's going to get red, and you're going to get these goosebumps. So when it happens, it's okay. Just breathe, go through it. It's part of the game. Okay. It's like the ice might be cold, but you don't have to suffer. It's all right. It's all good. When it happens, just to say, okay, it's okay. It's the same thing when we're like, let's say you said you figured out your target. Then you figured out what needs to be done in order to get there. The third layer, in my opinion, is what emotions you need to expect that are going to arise in you while you do that. Like, oh, I'm going to solve this bottleneck, but I'm also going to have this like, oh, people are going to think I'm good enough because my social following isn't that big, and it's going to give me this self-doubt. Because if I can preemptively understand, oh, that's going to happen when I'm in a calm, collected space and recognize, you know what, this is just a feeling I need to feel and I need to be okay feeling it. It's not something I actually have to address. It's not an actual problem. When I do the thing that I'm supposed to be doing, and as that feeling arises, I can be like, yeah, this is not comfortable. That would be nice if I had all that validation or whatever it may be, but all right, this is just something I expected to feel that I recognize ahead of time. It's not a problem. Still doesn't feel pleasant. Let's move on. However, if I don't anticipate that ahead of time, when I'm just doing my thing and all of a sudden I get blindsided by this emotion of like, wait, are we good enough? Is this okay for us to do? Then I'm going to be like, you know what, maybe I need to stop everything. Maybe I need to figure this out first. And it's going to take this giant detour. And that's why I think it's so important, like why you said, are you willing to? What I've seen that helps people be willing to do something, more than just a kind of, let's call it this thing with a certain sort of resilience. Like I'm willing to, I will do what it requires, but to actually accept and expect they're going to feel certain things and to be at peace with that. Okay, this is just a part of it. It's okay. It's not something that I need to stress out about. Does that make sense?
It does. So if I was to try to understand that, you know, anticipating the friction that you're going to butt up against, what do you think would be required from skills, experience perspectives in order to accurately anticipate that friction?
It's a great question. I'm not sure that a lot is required, honestly. I think it's just taking the time and visualizing it. Like when I'm about to do that thing, like visualize myself, I'm going to do that thing, I'm about to have the hard conversation. What comes up? What do I feel?
Yeah.
What do I tell myself? What goes on in my head? Like I think a lot of the times these aren't things that are so like, you know, magical and like mystical and secret. We can figure it out, but it's just about actually spending the time to do so. Most of the guys that I work with, again, they're super successful. Like some of them are like 8-9 figure guys. They're just not aware this is a thing to do. So like once you just give them this little like trick, they're like, oh, I can do that. I can spend, before I go to the meeting, I can spend, it's like 3 minutes figuring out what possible emotions might arise in me. Should I listen to them or should I not listen to them? Is this like part of my gut that I should trust or not? And then all of a sudden they come much more prepared.
Yeah.
I think we were talking about the podcast before we recorded about Chris Williamson. I think he said somewhere that like 20 minutes of preparation gives you 20 more IQ points. It's just that, but in this format. That just like 5 more minutes of just emotional awareness gives you all of a sudden an ability to be more calm and collected tenfold.
Got it. The reason why I want to understand the accuracy ability to predict the friction is I can draw stories where either I have been inaccurately reluctant to do something because my read of the friction was more extreme than it actually was. So, you know, I thought it was going to be more like I was going to feel more challenging emotions, but actually once I started that process, I was like, oh, this is not that bad. So my expectation was grossly over what I actually felt by doing the thing. Yeah. But I've also had situations where I've thought something was going to be frictionless, and then you embrace the friction, and there's almost this shock. So there wasn't a strong ability to accurately predict that friction. So it might be like in a sports analogy would be someone who's got a striking background coming across the jiu-jitsu, and you think, okay, I feel pretty confident sparring, most guys my, height, weight, whatever, experience level. You go onto the floor and you go, I know nothing. I thought I was good at fighting. I'm just being sort of slowly killed. So that would be probably inaccurate confidence. Yeah. I'm good at one thing. This looks kind of like that thing. So how hard can it be? Because I see that happening in business a lot, where people have had some success as, say, a solopreneur. I make X amount of money doing, like, I just build a team, I just tell people what to do, and they just always do it. It's like, sure.
It would be nice. Yeah.
And then they start realizing that it's not that simple, and they go through that process, and I wonder if that starts to actually cause almost like a subconscious trauma, that they become very, that they lack confidence in their ability to predict the future.
I think that's true. I think what's more true is to just expect it to be easy, to not have to feel a feeling like, oh, this is just easy. Business is just easy. Like if you go in with an expectation like I'm going to get punched in the mouth a lot, and that's okay, that's supposed to happen, it's very freeing. And it was actually something that I wanted to also talk about this, that, like I said, how do you figure out the friction? What if instead you just figure out this friction, period? It's going to be some kind of friction. And that if you can just learn there's going to be friction and I can be okay with that, that's it. I can keep solving problems even though I feel these certain things. Like I talked to another client, and it was, and I love him. First off, like he's like awesome dude, great dude. But it's a very common thing I see with a lot of, especially the guys that are like early 30s or a bit younger. It's this whole like, okay, before I do something really hard, I need to get myself in a positive mood. I need to just like amp myself up, get it done. It's like, no, you don't. You just need to expect some things are going to be hard. And like if you can be okay feeling a feeling, regardless of what that feeling specifically is and how you can forecast exactly what it is, but just to accept that like along the way from you doing A to getting to B, there's going to be a lot of feelings there. And that's okay. I don't have to have a detour. I can just sit with that. I can accept that while I do this thing, it's going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to make me question myself. I'm going to feel inadequate. If I can just accept those feelings along the way, then I can move forward. Like when we had Tal come and do the Officer to General program, we talked about that cycle. Like whenever you go into friction with reality, you'll feel an embarrassment because it'll show you in some way you're not good enough. And if you can accept that's okay, that's supposed to be there, there's nothing wrong. It's just an emotion that you happen to be having. You can still focus on the problem. Yeah. But if you don't accept anything, okay, if I have an emotion, something's wrong here. It's an indicator that something's wrong. My safety's at stake here. Then you'll focus on that. But again, like how you said, if you can just recognize this is the target you want to get to, where you are right now, the path to there, there's actually no real danger, no mortal danger to you. And you're okay with the risk of whatever you're going to take. You've preemptively made that peace. Then you accept that like you're going to have feelings along the way. If you can be okay having that feeling, that's that.
Yeah. Yeah, that 4 C's model really helped me understand that. We'll put a framework around that you make a commitment to doing something. Feels good for a second. And then if that's a new arena for you, you're probably going to be terrified the second after you made the commitment. Like, I'm going to leave the corporate job and start a business. It feels great. And then it's like, shit, now what do I do? Well, now you're in the courage zone because you don't have the capabilities. You might be a brilliant analyst for KPMG, but now you're starting e-com, clothing business. You have no idea how to do that. And that's one of the things I've seen play out with people where I think we all have like a youthful curiosity when we're kids because we know we don't know.
Yeah.
Everything is new.
Yes.
But we get these false bits of data that just because I'm good in one area, like the career changes. So people who come across to say the fitness industry or different coaching businesses, often they've been, at a high level in something else, and they transit across. And they think, well, I'm already at this level in my current domain. I'm probably going to be at that level in my next domain.
I deserve
to be. Yeah. Whereas if we looked at that, like I could be a great shot putter throwing a metal ball, there's very little carryover to how fast I can run 100 meters. Yeah. And if I think just because I'm kind of good at this athletics thing, I'm going to be good at this next athletics thing. So when we hit that friction, things don't go according to plan. That sales campaign didn't work. That new hire didn't work out. That's where I think that because I had an inaccurate expectation of what was required and the capabilities, they feel an overwhelming sense of emotional discomfort from that, and they start to question everything.
Yeah.
Like I'm no good at this. This is a big mistake. So it's this sort of either like a pendulum swing emotional state, whereas just looking at it objectively and saying, I'm doing a new thing. I know nothing about this new thing. I'm far more likely to get it wrong than get it right. I can either try to accelerate my learning, split test things, and I'm just going to learn and iterate, and eventually I'll get to good. But believing that I'm good just because I want to be good is probably going to cause more pain than it's going to protect me.
Yeah. And like a way I would like to summarize that is just, are you okay getting constantly punched in the mouth? If you're doing things that are constantly above your skill level, like if you're sparring with someone who's above your skill level because you want to get better, you're getting constantly punched in the mouth. If every time you get punched in the mouth, you're like, well, wait, something must be wrong here. This doesn't feel nice. You're going to stay at that level. But if you're just like, okay, this is part of it, it gives you that ability to proceed very fast. And it's easier, I feel, to do that when we're brand new in something. Because we tell ourselves, okay, I'm supposed to like suck at this right now. It's okay if I feel like stupid or whatever. This is part of it. What we oftentimes don't remind ourselves, even when we're really good at something, if we're trying to go to the next level, we're also going to feel that as well. And a lot of time, that's what I see confuse people. They're like, I'm already really good. Like, why does this feel so frustrating? Because it's above your current capabilities, and that's what you want. So just recognize that and recognize that you're going to feel a feeling along the way, but don't let that emotion confuse you to think that's what you actually need to focus on. It's just part of the game. And if you can focus on the actual problem, that's how you win.
Perfect.
Does that make sense?
Perfect. It does.
Cool. Any last things for me to summarize this?
Not really. It's really helpful. It's something which I try to use in my business frequently, is just trying to nut out what problem we're actually really trying to solve here.
Yep.
And I'm okay with that seeming like it's more complex or time consuming. But identifying the right problem is the best way to actually solve the problem. Just, almost vomiting out the problem. A lot of business owners, I think, are too reactive and too impulsive.
Which is an emotional response usually.
Yeah, because it feels bad. Things aren't growing, or things are going bad. So I just want to take any action, because action is good.
I know we were going to wrap it up, but what I've noticed a lot of times is the opposite. It's that it causes inaction. So this is the biggest thing. So I was in a mastermind with somebody, and he was saying that the business was kind of going all right, but it stalled for a while. And then he was like, okay, what's the next thing we got to do here? He's like, I know I need to let go of some of the staff. I need to change kind of the way we operate, the culture, da-da-da-da. And he was like, but man, it's like, that feels very uncomfortable. I don't know if I want to do it. And I had to be like, dude, culture of excellence isn't inclusive. You know that, right? It's like cultures of excellence are harsh. Like I always talk about it. I got kicked out of a unit, and rightfully so. And it's like, sometimes these things do not feel nice to be excellent. Like whether it's the culture you set or you and yourself personally. Like I think there's this fallacy that if you're doing the things to make your business grow, you just feel like you're on fire. And it's like, I don't remember, there was some analogy, some like artist, he was saying that, I think a writer. It's like whenever I write, I feel like a armless, headless, like schmuck or whatever it may be. And I think that's really what separates a lot of elite performers from the mediocre ones. The people who have all the potential in the world. Mm-hmm. The elite performers accept there's a price to pay, an emotional price to pay for excellence. You're going to feel stupid. You're going to feel uncomfortable. You're going to feel inadequate at times. And I'm saying that for like myself as well. If you can be okay having that feeling and recognize that when an emotion pops up, you do not need to focus on it. You can just have it and sit with it and still do the thing and actually solve the actual problem. That's where you get a lot more problem solved and you get a lot more of the results that you want. And beyond that, on a really deep level, when you actually finish solving the problem, that emotion of fear, discomfort, or whatever that you were going to solve, it dissipates anyway and it gets filled with pride instead. Because you're like, I'm really proud of myself that I felt this thing and I didn't let that control me. And I think if anyone's at home listening to this and they're like caught up with like, this feels like this or this feels like that, if you can learn to be okay having that feeling and push through it, on the other side, beyond the success, the external results and all that, there's such a great feeling of peace and pride, knowing that, when these things happen again in the future, they're not going to hold me captive. This is a skill of learn, to be able to have a feeling and move forward with it. I think that's the ultimate freedom, to not be bound by these emotions all the time.
Yep. One last thing for the audience
Please.
would be, I think that as you develop your skill at thinking strategically, thinking on the problems and how to solve it. It's an art form, but it's also an art form of how to actually communicate that to peers, because if they're not thinking through the same perspective, there's a bit of a misalignment here. And an example I had that might add some sort of colour to this was recently I had a situation where 2 key staff resigned almost like one day, one the next day, in a very personality-centric business. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm geographically removed from that business, so I don't suffer the same emotional challenges that, say, my management team do. And I could tell that the immediate reactions of 2 key staff resigning overnight was, this sucks. How are we going to replace them? It's all doom and gloom. Everyone's going to leave. And so rather than me just try to say this is exactly what's going to happen, I had to sort of coach them through to just trying to get us all more or less on the same perspective. Because if we're not on the same perspective, then there's going to be a lot of friction in terms of executing upon the actions required. Yeah. So I sit down with them and said, okay, if we had to lose 2 staff, this is a game show, and we had to lose 2 staff, out of the team, what would be the 2 that would be okay with leaving? Oh, the same 2 who resigned. Okay, so if we had to lose 2 staff, we kind of got lucky that it was the 2 staff. If there was a time of the year that we had to lose 2 staff, when would that be? Like seasonally, are there any trends in our, right now. Okay, so best time of the year. In terms of our business life cycle, when would be the best time? Maybe say peak customer base, but newer, so there's not a culty sort of vibe. Oh, right now. And so I could keep going on, but there was a series of prompts that helped them sort of, and I could literally see it in their body language and their faces, from a very almost shell shock, what do we do? I don't know what the future holds, but it's probably bad, to actually, we kind of won the lottery here. I didn't want them to leave, but if we had to lose 2 people, they were the 2 staff, they had to do it at this is the best time of the year, at the best stage of the business life cycle. So now actually we've kind of got the destination. Yeah. The path towards helping them exit on good terms and getting new recruits in, that's all we need to work out. And it brought us straight down to really practical steps in terms of, okay, how do we help those staff exit on good terms but not kill the business? How do we get new people in to fill those spots? And we could look at it much more objectively, because we could see it outside of the emotional state of feeling like we've invested so much into these people and how can they do this to us, and we really want to grow together forever. I still feel those same emotions, but I've just been through the fires more than enough times to get out of there very quickly. So I've got the ability to recognize it and then to move beyond it.
Would you say to recognize it and then externalize it?
Yes.
Because I think that's what I heard from you.
Yes.
The biggest thing is that these guys that you have there, they were shell shocked. They were in their feelings. Oh, we just lost. I'd lost these 2 people. Am I not good enough? Am I not this? And you were like, okay, let's look at this actual. Imagine there was this business. What would be the best season? And when you externalize that, all of a sudden they were able to focus on the problem, not just their emotion. Yeah. And I think that's why it's a great tool. We also had Julian on the podcast back in the day, and he was very open about this. I think he had a 70-person company. And I was like, you need to let go of a lot of your staff. You know that. They're not, because you don't have a culture. When he got started, he was a bit less comfortable leading people the right way, in a more clear and defined, if you're not performing, you're not performing. And he just boiled it down to a spreadsheet for himself. He didn't even do this with others. And once he saw the spreadsheet and all the data, he was like, okay, this is just a math problem, like you said. And sometimes, again, this goes back to what you said in the beginning. If you can just put it down on paper in some way, it's not about how does this feel to me, but what does the data show? What should somebody be doing with this kind of data?
Yeah. I think that's why Elon Musk rubs people off the wrong way, because he's very much a first principles thinker. Yeah. And so when he bought Twitter, now X, when he's walked in and said, okay, we're going to 80%, shave the head count, the media go up in arms and there's a lot of pushback. But he could just talk about it very, objectively and say, but let's speak to that. So if he was focused on how are people going to perceive me, or what will this make me feel if people say this or that about me in the media, he can't do that. Yes. But he was problem focused. His problem was how do we get this thing to be profitable? Not emotion focused. How do I care about people think about me, or how does this feel? And that's it. If you can have that, Elon Musk has it as a superpower, if you can adopt it as well, it could take you very long. That's where I think those 3 buckets help sort of understand it, is he knew what had to happen. Okay, I've got a very inflated head count that doesn't need to be there to serve the functions of the technology. So I know the what. Do I have the capabilities? Well, yeah, I'm the decision maker, so I can just kind of have a lot of painful conversations or send one email, however it sort of happens, bring a sink into the office. So I know what to do. I'm capable of doing it. Am I willing to execute? And he's like, yes. Because for him, he wasn't clouded by the emotions. What will people say? What will people think? It's just like, that's the thing to do.
And I'll say this. I think Elon is unique. Obviously, he's obviously unique. There's no way around it. Most people don't have that innate, like, I just don't care. Most people do care. But if you can recognize, okay, this is something that's going to like feel a bit uncomfortable. For him, it might not even felt uncomfortable. But if you can recognize this might feel uncomfortable for me, but I can be at peace with that, that's how you can win. Like, that's the trick to get to that level of, perhaps not that exact level of performance, but those kind of capabilities. Most people don't have that. So they know what they should. They know how to do it if they're capable of it. They think they commit to it, but they commit just to doing it, not to actually feeling the pain that's going to be associated with it. And if you can preemptively understand this, I'm going to feel some kind of discomfort, some pain, whatever it may be alongside that, that's how you can win.
Yes, he doesn't suffer from that optional emotional tax.
Yeah.
That's how he creates, half a dozen unicorn businesses at the same point in time. And so if you're trying to grow a small lawn mowing service and having friction, yet someone else can be growing these unicorn enterprises, shaping the future of the world. Maybe the difference is because that one person, as unique and capable as he is, doesn't cloud himself with all the emotional, unnecessary friction. He just does what's required.
Yeah. So I go to a lot of conferences, right? And I interact with a lot of people. And what I've seen be a very common denominator about people's success levels is not how intelligent or hardworking they are, but how much access they have to their intelligence. And what I mean by that is that a lot of entrepreneurs that I meet, especially like when people come to me and they're like just at 6 figures or below that, they're very confined because they have all these emotions of like, I can do this, I can't do this, what will this mean? So they can't access their abilities. Like the guys above that, they start shedding that onwards and onwards and onwards, like at different levels. But it's really just an access issue. Like if you can't be okay having a feeling, like you're not going to do certain things. Mm-hmm. If you're not going to do certain things, you're not going to get certain things. And that's just what it is.
Perfect.
So I want to wrap it up with something new I want to do with the pod. Basically a concept summary and then a tactical summary for people. So the concept summary is to ask yourself, are you focused on the problem or on how you feel? Most people instinctually prioritize their feelings over solving actual problems. If a problem at work stresses them out, they'll instinctively look for a way to not feel the stress, perhaps by distracting themselves with alcohol or drugs or food or whatever it may be. If they face a complex problem, they look for a way to stop feeling overwhelmed, perhaps again by avoiding it or pretending it doesn't exist. They focus on how they feel instead of the actual problem. And the issue here is that when they're done venting or dealing with that emotion, the problem is still going to be there. And that's the biggest thing. So you have a choice. Whenever a problem pops in our lives or businesses, we'll usually have an emotional reaction to it. Again, unless you're Elon Musk, unless you're on that spectrum, most of us will. However, you get to decide what you'll focus on. This is the big thing. You get to have that position of power. You can focus on how that problem makes you feel, or you can focus on actually solving the problem. And no, how you feel is not the actual problem. It's more often than not just a side effect, even though it's not nice to say or whatever it may be. So the next time you're feeling yourself getting emotional and want to shift your focus towards impactful action, simply ask yourself, am I emotion focused right now? Or am I problem focused? Which one is taking me in the wrong direction? And just that one simple question can give you clarity on what you need to focus on and what you don't need to if you want to be effective in solving your problem. And that's the context. So the tactical summary would be, where do you commonly find yourself not doing what you're supposed to be doing? Because we usually have it in one area. For some people, it's management, like you said. For other people, just doing their own planning, whatever it may be. So would stopping and asking yourself, am I emotion focused or problem focused, help you snap out of it? That's one. And even more powerful than that, when you're making a plan, preemptively accept and try to anticipate what emotions am I going to feel. If you can figure out, I'm exactly going to feel that sense of like, I might not be good enough, I need more social proof, whatever it may be, great. That's the best. If not, though, you can just figure out, you know what? This is going to suck, though. There's going to be some suck in it. And you can just make peace with that it's going to feel uncomfortable. Just that. So when an emotion comes, you're like, oh, this feels uncomfortable. You're like, yes, that was supposed to be here. Nothing is wrong. It just feels uncomfortable. If you can do that, you can get on with it and you can see so much more success. And honestly, like I said, I think this is a bottleneck to so many people being elite performers. They just haven't made peace with the fact that you're going to feel emotions, and that might drag you away from actually solving the problem. So if you can be okay with feeling a feeling, and you can actually solve the problem instead of focusing on your emotions, you can get so much more done and so much more accomplished.
100%.
Cool. And on that note, we'll wrap it up for today.
Perfect, man.